for a lot of people in manufacturing, they're engineers. They love the products, seeing things being made, being part of that. I think there's a lot of doing to be done, but scaling a business is different. The skill, of a good leader is surrounding yourself with the right people.
Made to Grow, the podcast for SME manufacturers, brought to you by Flowlens, the simple, affordable MRP system. Over 10 episodes, we've got a host of experienced manufacturers, industry thought leaders, and subject matter experts sharing their personal stories and professional insights to help you on your manufacturing success story. So, stay tuned and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts for a new episode every fortnight. This episode, my guest is Gary Sheeter, founder and managing director of the Manufacturers Alliance, a company which supports manufacturing leaders through professional development and peer-to-peer networking. We touch on some of the lessons Gary has learned over his 10 years of running the Alliance, and some of the common attributes of the successful manufacturing leaders he has helped. And with that, let's get started. Welcome to Gary Sheeter from Manufacturers Alliance, and welcome to the Made to Grow podcast, Gary.
Thanks, Rich.
I'm delighted to have you on board to sort of tell the story of what you do. You work with, a wide variety of very exciting and fast-growing manufacturers. Would you like to give listeners just a bit more background to that and why, what motivates you to do what you do?
Yeah, we're just celebrating 10 years in business, so it's all become very prominent again, really. Why? It's funny how when those noughts appear on the end of a personal age or a business age, you start reflecting a little bit more on, pop your head up and say, why am I doing this again? So yeah, we've been through that again recently, going back to the beginning and saying, why did we begin in the first place? And yeah, it's still the same today, really. You go back 10 years and started to notice, particularly small, medium-sized manufacturing companies, fairly time poor, not having huge amounts of time to spend outside the business, and needing some support and guidance on getting to where they would like to get to, and and overcome some of the challenges that they've got. And initially just set up a networking group, just a forum for manufacturers to chat to each other, and people love that. We just from Bolton, near, just on the outskirts of Lancashire, and we like pies and peas, and it was just a pie and peas evening, bit of food, have a natter, learn a few things, and yeah, over time there was a group of people that wanted a little bit more than just pie and peas and chatting, and were saying, we're willing to commit a bit more time to learning from each other. And it's kind of how the Manufacturers Alliance launched, really. It was a concept, an idea of bringing a group of businesses together to share ideas and support each other, and it's worked. Mm-hmm. So I think rather than the traditional kind of consulting model of just working with one business and consultants come in and out, and they go to the next business and they do the same thing again. It just felt at the time, and still do, that people could learn so much from each other. It's not that anti bringing people in when you need it. I still think there's a need, but I think people can get a lot of ideas from sitting in a room, chatting, visiting each other's businesses, and that's how we've evolved and grown, really. Yeah. So the why we do it is still the same. I'm just inspired by people who are just willing to give stuff a go, and take on those challenges, be a bit vulnerable, do things that are different. And I just like people who are progressive and like giving stuff a try.
That's like whenever we were chatting beforehand, we were talking about the profile of your members has evolved, because actually that a lot of them have grown, and in large part probably to the motivation and the facilitation that you've given them through the alliance and through those peer connections. I mean, from first-hand experience, I'm part of a CEO's group that, in terms of software, and we've got a wide array of different sort of markets that we all serve. So there's little overlap in terms of competitiveness, which is great because then you can openly share a lot of the common problems, and it's a great way to kind of get out of your shell and get out of the weeds. So it's a model that really does work.
And it's cathartic, I think.
Yeah.
Going, because you feel a bit lonely and lost at times, can't you? When you've got a problem and you're feeling stuck, you think it's all happening to you sometimes, but then being around a group of people who've got similar challenges, it is quite cathartic and just a bit of a warm feeling that it's not just me who struggles with this.
Exactly. No, it definitely. There's been a few times whenever I felt like locking myself in a darkened room, but a good chat with somebody who's been there and done that and has had exactly the same problem it makes you feel better, and usually they've got a few pointers that you haven't thought of because you're too busy pulling your hair out. So how do the peer groups work then? Are they kind of across the north of England, or how far do you go?
Currently, we cover the northwest, Yorkshire, North Wales, so middle band of the north. Really, we're probably as far south as Stoke. Cover all the northwest all the way up to the Lake District, and then right across that middle band.
And do you have a criteria for how people can join into that? Because once you've formed a group like that, it's obviously tricky to then introduce new people into it. There's dynamics can change, or relationships and bonds have been created that you have to manage. So how do you sort of support the recruitment process?
I think when you're with people of a similar mindset, I think you connect almost instantly. I think when you feel like you're with your kin, you just know that you're in the right room.
Yeah.
So I think the recruitment's relatively easy as long as people are open-minded. They have got a growth mindset. They're willing to try new things, be vulnerable, share things that are not working, as well as sharing successes. I think as long as you have that mind, then I think you're fine. But obviously, the more of those you put across against, the less there's going to be of a fit with the people in the group.
Exactly, and it's better to get the awkward conversation over quickly, and move on, isn't it? So, in terms of those leaders who are achieving scale, I mean, we talked about the kind of modern leadership scoring assessment that you have published on your website, where you're looking at the key areas of leadership. And so you're working with a lot of different businesses, but really curious to understand, what are the kind of traits and characteristics of those leaders that set the high growth and ambitious companies apart from those that are just maybe lifestyle businesses, or just don't make it in the same way.
I'll try. I mean, obviously there's thousands of business books on this stuff, but I'll try and stick to things that I think are relevant to manufacturing. I think for a lot of people in manufacturing, they're engineers. They love the products, the seeing things being made, being part of that, and it's fantastic. Yeah, and it's great to have something tangible that comes out the other end of a process. I mean, manufacturing's an amazing environment to work in. So people are quite hands-on in the roles as they come up through the ranks, which I think poses a challenge which may be different in other sectors, and that's the rewards of climbing the ladder and getting into senior leadership positions and owning manufacturing companies. I think there's a lot of doing to be done, but scaling a business is different.
Yeah.
So the hands-on doing, it is almost nothing anymore, and you're completely hands-off, which is a transition. It's not, you finish on a Friday and that's it. Monday I'm I'm hands off. But there is a transition to be made, and it isn't for everyone. I think for some people who are in the manufacturing sector, they would much rather be, the hands-on doer and not the hands-off, strategist who's, forward-looking, assessing the markets, leading and supporting the team. So I think that poses a challenge and a risk in manufacturing, which can be overcome, if as long as it's what people want to do. I think something else that I see quite a lot of in manufacturing is like understanding the markets.
Yeah.
Something I've seen quite a lot of over the last 10 years, particularly with the growth of digital marketing, is companies say, we want to do more marketing, and they recruit an apprentice, straight out of school or college, and give them the responsibility, the whole marketing for a 2, 5, 10, 15 million turnover business.
I know they're thrown in at the deep end.
But the responsibility is huge, but like the marketing of a company is fundamental to its success. So, yeah, I think for those businesses that scale, they understand that the leader as a means of, pooling that knowledge and understanding of what's going on out in the market. And that's not necessarily just customers, that's an understanding of, capability in terms of resource and equipment availability, people, political landscape. There are lots of things that, affect, understanding the marketplace. And I think once you have an understanding of the market and current customers and what you want your future customers to be, the only way you're really going to grow is by understanding value from your customer's perspective.
And that's where, if you're in the factory too much, you see the product going out the door, but you're not necessarily seeing it in the hands of the customers. You're not interacting with them and seeing how their worlds are changing in a very dynamic way. Because we're in a sense we're like a manufacturer of software. Our raw materials are lines of code, and our product is intangible, but it's a very familiar story. The more you spend with your customers and understanding how their markets are changing, the more you can take that back to the business and actually innovate and inspire people. Because I think, like for me, sort of the vision and direction piece of leadership is really, it's vital to be able to convince yourself, never mind your team, that there's something there worth striving for. So getting out of the building is the only way to really get some perspective and see that. Do you spend a lot of time coaching, or in the peer groups coaching leaders around the vision piece, or did you find that when they're at the stage that they're part of the alliance, that they've already got a good idea of that?
I think it's mixed. I think people join our peer groups with particular strengths, and we're all different, and we're all strong in different areas. And I think the skill, of a good leader is surrounding yourself with the right people. If I've got a completely different skill set to you, Rich, my team around me is going to look very different to yours. So I think there's there's understanding that about running a business. I think the person who joins will have a set of skills, and they may be, fantastic at assessing and understanding markets, but the manufacturing facilities aren't particularly efficient. They're good at bringing the work in, but margins aren't what they could be just because our facilities are brilliant. But then you've got someone else in a peer group who they're operationally fantastic, but they're not brilliant at winning new business. So that's where it really works well. You've got different different people in a group with different skills, and that's normal, isn't it? We're all different, aren't we? And we've all got something we're going to bring to to a group.
Exactly, and you can, and that's a perfect way to learn from other people and other perspectives. Have you come across like a founder of a business who maybe just decided that I'm not the right person to be the CEO, and they've actually passed that that baton on to somebody else?
Yeah, that's that's not uncommon, and I think hats off to anyone who recognises that I'm not the right person to take the
It's a
business
courageous
to the
thing to
next
do.
level. It is, yeah. There's huge vulnerability to that, of how that might be perceived. I mean, I would see that as a strength, really, to recognise what your own abilities are and what you're good at and where you're best placed in a company. But yeah, we do see that where people recruit an MD, who's going to take the business to the next level. They can see that the business got potential, and it's usually when people start treading water for quite some time. We keep having this push on, trying to get to the next level, and we don't manage it not under my leadership. So some people will carry that on for 10, 20 years, but other people recognise that and say, it's probably time for me to step aside and let someone else, move it on.
The Made to Grow podcast is brought to you by Flowlens, the simple, affordable MRP system specifically designed for SME device, equipment and machinery manufacturers. Our top-rated cloud-based software can help you cut down on wasted materials, time and money, and eliminate the chaos of running your manufacturing with spreadsheets and hope. Our customers have reported savings of over a day per week per person in their business by cutting out needless admin, duplication of work and countless mistakes. Plus, lead times are shortened by up to 75%. And after hundreds of successful implementations, we've got the blueprint for manufacturing success nailed down. Head over to flowlens.com for a quick video tour of the software and to hear from more manufacturers like you who have transformed their businesses with Flowlens. Now, back to the interview. I suppose that comes on to a mindset conversation. One of the areas that your scorecard covers is the growth mindset, and there's a lot been written and spoken about growth mindset. And when you first come across it, it feels like a bit like a fait accompli. You've either got it or you haven't, and then you realize, well, actually, you can be very growth orientated and open minded about certain things, but closed about other things. And I can see even with my kids where you can coach that out of them with a lot of persistence and some chocolate. So manufacturers like chocolate too, of course, but we're keen to understand how do you approach that whenever you get a member who's maybe standing in their own way, basically.
It's a scale, isn't it? None of us are at the top. We've all got, I'm sure, a few things that we're quite close to, that that we could be more open to. But I think that the higher you score on that scale, the more open you are to learning and trying new things. Which to truly innovate, you have to be, don't you? There is, without trying something new, you're not innovating. And in the world that we're in and the pace of change, and how the world's changing so quickly, and it feels like we're in that shift now. Lots of things are changing at the same time. You have to have that open-mindedness to try new things, and trying new things means sometimes you don't get the outcome that you want, but that's a learning opportunity, and you try something else. But I do think that's where a peer group type environment helps as well. When you see other people, you're inspired by what other people are trying, and you may have been close to that before, and you might say, well, that's not really for me. We wouldn't do that. But then, one person does it, 3, 6, you see 8, 9, 10 other people doing it, and you think maybe it's time I gave that a go. So it can just be that, just being inspired by other people sometimes. It's a good reason to go out the four walls of your business, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. No, because you only know what you know, and if you're not out in whatever forum, you can't see what's out there. And I think learning from other people about how to practically apply things, like we see this a lot with technology adoption, where there's a fear of the unknown. People are used to their spreadsheets or their legacy systems, and they do a job. They can't really see the kind of hidden waste involved in those systems or processes, because it's just the way they've always used them. But whenever they see them in action in another business, it's not a sales guy trying to sell them something. They can actually see, whether it's process tools like ours, or machine monitoring, or automation. It's the best way to actually understand the pros and the cons. So having that peer group is a really powerful thing. Again, because particularly if it's not competitive, then it's a great way to learn things and share that learning.
But you have to be able to show up, whether it's in a peer group or wherever you're sharing it. You have to be able to share and say there are things that are not working, or there are things that I'm not good at, and just even this week, I've been along to one of our peer groups this week, and the inspiration in the room was from someone sharing something that they felt that they really could have done better. They introduced something to the management team. It didn't land as they expected, but they were very open and shared. Going back through the timeline of events of, if I'm being honest, this is kind of how it panned out. But I think recognising the points that I probably could have done a bit differently, and in hindsight, after some feedback, I didn't get that bit right, and that's it just inspires the room. I mean, not only they learn from it, and when that happens in our team, we'll do it differently, but just to be able to approach someone or a group of people and say, the stuff I'm getting wrong. There's no one who isn't, is there?
Exactly.
You're telling lies, aren't you? If you say you're running a business and you haven't made a few mistakes, then I wouldn't believe anyone who said that.
Exactly. Humility is another key characteristic, I think, of good leaders, to be able to admit to those mistakes and learn from them quickly. Just on the scorecard, so via your website, it's free. There's 32 questions. You call it the modern manufacturing leader model. Can you tell us a wee bit more about how that was kind of constructed, or how you chose to develop that?
I mean, over 10 years, we've got 10 peer groups now. We've got an academy where we do a lot of leadership and development training. We roll our sleeves up with some customers and help them with some of the really complex issues. We just built up a pool of knowledge and experience of what works and what doesn't, where the real risks are. Because I mean, the way that our peer groups work, people are sharing with us. They meet every month. Every month, people share. This has worked well. This hasn't. So if you imagine over a 10-year period, we've got a huge depth, to things that have been shared, and I'm just always intrigued by just trying to get right down to the root cause of what it is that's creating a successful outcome. Yeah. But for any person, whether they run a business or they're an athlete or a musician, there are some fundamentals, aren't there, to why some people succeed and some don't. So we've just picked out what we feel are the pertinent questions to ask someone.
In preparation for this, I went through it myself, and there's some of them I kind of some days I feel like a yes, some days I feel like a no. how sort of upfront are you with your employees about how you're feeling? Well, some days they don't need to know. So it definitely makes you think about, how you operate and how you act, and it gives some interesting feedback on each of the different areas. So I'd recommend, free to do via Manufacturers Alliance website for people to check it out. I suppose then that gives you a good kind of diagnostic for somebody maybe new to the group as to how you can engage with them and how you can introduce them maybe to others who can play to their strengths and to their weaknesses.
Our first protocol with anyone really who says, this isn't where it could be, and I would like it to be better. The first thing we try and do is to introduce them to another customer that we've got that have either resolved that issue or it's something they're very good at. And quite often we can introduce people to 2 or 3 people within. We've got WhatsApp groups for all our peer groups. We can usually make an introduction within a few hours.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever people present, it's very, very rare that someone has a problem that someone hasn't experienced at some point. So the first thing we do is usually make an introduction and just chat to someone else who've worked through it, whatever that thing is.
Most people are very open to share, aren't they? At least that's what I found in the manufacturing community. It's it is very much a problem solving, an open environment. So it's a healthy place to be whenever you have that peer group. Are there any other habits you mentioned about the root cause? And I'm a great believer in good habits, and sometimes the weather can dictate how frequently I stick to the habit of getting up in the morning for a run. But it's those sorts of things that keep you sane. Are there other habits that you see scaling leaders exhibit that are positive and inspiring?
Yeah, I think in the current climate, and this is only going to increase, and that's the need for good data.
Mm-hmm.
You should always trust your gut. I sometimes the data's telling you something, you just have to go with your gut feel, but you can't do that for everything. You can't, run a complex facility just making gut feel all day. That's definitely going to catch you out. So, yeah, I think the businesses that scale and with pace, in an agile way, they are increasing that access to data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's some simple, quick and dirty ways of doing it, and that's it's pieces of paper, good visual management, and having a scorecard. In every department, is an easy way of doing things, but it's hard to kind of to pull all that for a greater understanding. So I think where we're at in manufacturing is with Industry 4 technologies, sensor technologies, good ERP systems, the use of systems like Power BI, is having really intelligent dashboards that are giving you a real-time information on how your business is doing, and it's probably your quickest route to scaling, and do it based on facts and not on certainly not assumption. So I would say that's becoming a good habit of our customers that are that are scaling.
Yeah.
As well as trying to make themselves redundant, and it's a difficult concept to get your head around. But there's real value in trying to make yourself redundant, because to do that you have to have a team around you that can run the day to day, in the business, and maybe even do some of the forward looking, and future proof the company, and it increases the value of the company for one. If your business operates without you around, it's it's of more value. But it also frees up your time to think strategically, plan, better moves for the future for the company. But you need to park your ego as well for that, don't you? You have to admit that some people can do some of these jobs better than I can.
That's interesting. I usually ask my guests to wrap up with one piece of advice to leave our listeners with, but you've given us 3 really valuable ones there. So that, the need for good data habits and being able to interrogate that data and not just rely on your gut, which obviously, coming from our perspective, that's something that we preach all day long, and it's one of the kind of hidden wastes that we would see out there, that people don't realize how much opportunity cost there is in not looking after their data and not exploiting it. But the making yourself redundant as well is another invaluable one, because I think any opportunity to get brought back into the business, being tempted to do firefighting, either there's a problem with the process or there isn't a person in the role there to properly, or to be properly accountable for whatever problems there are. But whenever you do get to that stage, you've actually got the opportunity to step back and truly figure out what it is that will scale your business and make the most impact. Parking the ego is the only way to do it. I think, coming back to the point about mistakes, you can either accept your mistakes and learn from them, or you can pretend they didn't happen, and that's a lot to do with ego as well.
Yeah, you can't scale, can you? You can't scale a business where you're the key decision maker for everything. It's just not. It's not possible.
I mean, this has been a great discussion, Gary. I think the members of the Manufacturers Alliance are lucky to have you and have that forum. It's fantastic, and it must be contributing significantly to the UK PLC growth to have that. It's invaluable. So congratulations, and thank you again for your time. Just for the benefit of our listeners, we'll put this in the show notes, but just what's the web address that people should go to if they're more interested in more info?
The web address is manufacturersalliance.co.uk.
Well, Gary, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks again to Gary for joining me on this, our final episode of Made to Grow Series 1. It's a fitting episode to end on, as it has been largely focused on how manufacturers can support each other by sharing their experiences and the lessons they've learned over their careers. This podcast is, in a way, another means of enabling that sharing of experience and knowledge, and hopefully you've learned a lot from a wide variety of guests, many of whom worked for the majority of their careers or specialise in manufacturing. Over the past 11 episodes, we've had guests from the world of finance and funding, marketing and leadership, mindset, systems implementation, recruitment, and industry representative bodies. So if you want to learn more about any of these areas, visit our podcast show page to find out more. If there's an area you'd like to hear more about in our next series, an expert you think would make for an excellent guest, or if you think there's something you'd like to share with our audience, please get in touch with us on LinkedIn @Flowlens. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our guests for giving up their time and sharing their expertise. And of course, thank you for listening. Thanks also to the team working behind the scenes to research and put together the podcast. I hope you agree it's been a great production. Hopefully you'll join us in a couple of months' time for the next season of Made to Grow, the manufacturing podcast from Flowlens.